Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I have a special guest with me today. His name is Antony Rotunno, and he runs the podcast. It's a Beatle-related podcast called Glass Onion on John Lennon. And one of the podcasts that drew me into his show was called The Truth Will Set You Free, but First It Will Piss You Off. So that kind of explains his channel a little bit with regard to the Beatles. So Antony, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you started the podcast?
Hi Matt, thanks for having me on. Been watching your channel for about a year, I think.
Oh, well, thanks.
The video was kind of drawn to the Beatles ones. Predictable enough, but anyway. So I actually have three podcasts, but the one that's most relevant is Glass Onion on John Lennon. Started it getting on for 3 years ago now. Why I started it, really, I was amazed that there wasn't another podcast for John Lennon. Obviously, there weren't that many Beatles ones then. There's been a huge spike in the last 3 years. But John Lennon, I still don't think there's any other John Lennon-centric ones. And I probably wouldn't encourage them either, because I like having the floor for myself. But, it's just kind of a deep dive. I have a bit of a psychology background, and although it probably sounds a lot like pop psychology, but some of that is still accurate, And I didn't really plan it to be like this, but I haven't really done many reviews and things like that. We've been doing John Lennon in a particular year, like a series. I mean, I haven't done that for a while, but that was a series that was going on. And just a deep dive, really. And we managed to get some amazing people. In fact, the thing that finally spurred me on to start was that when Rod Davis of the Quarrymen said, I'll talk to you. And I thought, well, I did the talk, and then I'd been procrastinating, like sometimes happens. And when he said yes, I was just like, yeah, okay, let's do it. So I managed to get two of the Quarrymen, actually. It's quite amazing.
Well, that's great, because you've not only talked to two Quarrymen, but one or two others that have had some actual contact with John Lennon.
Yeah.
So you've had some unique guests on. We'll get to one of those later that I want to talk about. But this whole idea, the reason I was drawn to you and maybe you to me, was this idea of historiography and talking about the Beatles in a little bit of a different way, and weighing some of the evidence that's been laid out for us for 50 years, which, now that the dust is settling, some of it's reliable, some of it's not. And it takes quite a bit of work to sift through all the evidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that helps is not expecting to really get the truth, but just to get like little bits. You get some evidence or something, and then you think, well, I think I've worked out now that that's probably true, or that's pretty true. But one of the recent shows we did, we concluded, we were both saying we probably only know 5 or 10%. That there might be all kinds of enormous secrets that we're never going to find out. So I think what's quite freeing about it is if you think, well, if I can just get a tiny bit of truth to add to this enormous puzzle, then I'll be happy, But I treat it almost as a mystery now. It's like a mystery story. What's true and what isn't, and who the hell knows? I tell my listeners that the more I find out, the less I know. It's like drinking yourself sober. If Beatles knowledge is alcohol, I've drunk myself sober. So I tell my audience that I'm giving you my best guess, and my best guess is getting better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. It's the truth is not. I mean, if to go and try to obtain the absolute truth is a futile exercise. So the way I approach it is going through a lot of the evidence. There's some evident truths that are just factual truths, Beatles chart history and different things, and you can use the industry as somewhat of a barometer as to how things were going. But to get to absolute truth is not going to happen. So I keep trying to get closer to the truth. And even that's a struggle, because there's oftentimes a lot of backlash when certain evidence comes out. People don't want to always accept it or listen to it or even discuss it. So that's always, that I find that fascinating as well, is how people take in this information and how they respond to it.
Yeah, and how maybe we all protect certain truths or beliefs.
Especially,
I think we do that in the world, so we may as well do that with Beatles as well.
Yeah, especially if there's an investment in it. If somebody writes a book on a certain topic and a lot of their life is spent coming up with that information, if all of a sudden there's information to the contrary, they don't let go of those original concepts easily. So, but that's the nature of history, I guess. And now that 50 years has passed since the breakup of the Beatles, we're just starting to get a little bit of a clearer picture of some of the actual events. And one of the things I've built some of my videos on is just looking at some of the evidence that the Beatles have given us, looking at that a little more closely, and that doesn't quite match what we've been told all these years. So that I find that fascinating. I find that very satisfying to get the Beatles kind of breaking the myth that they helped to create in many instances.
Yeah, and some of your videos, like you did one about the George and Paul argument.
Oh yeah.
And you did one about all things must pass was not rejected by the Beatles.
Correct.
And it's interesting if you just take like what is in the whole Beatles puzzle, these tiny morsels like George and Paul having an argument which lasted 30 seconds. And even you look at that and you think that may not be right, what we've been told. So I think what I was saying earlier about I had a guest host on, David, and we were saying we probably know more facts, but in terms of the psychodrama, which is possibly obviously there's the music is already there, but I think the psychodrama really pulls everybody in.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays, because there's so many Beatles podcasts and there's obviously YouTubers and there's the internet, there's all kinds of stuff that people are probably finding out that I'm never going to know about, because at the moment I don't really have time to absorb it all. Yeah. I used to be at a point where I wanted to absorb everything. Like if someone said some Beatle fact I didn't know, I used to get annoyed, and it's just like ego. It's just my ego reacting. But
sure.
Now I'm like, I think I'm in a relaxed place because I'm thinking that all these people doing the other podcasts, they probably found out loads of tidbits that I didn't know.
Yeah, I find that happening with my videos too. I'll do like a video on a band that will be, I'll have done extensive research, or I can't buy every book and I can't get to everything. So I'll lay out an overview the best I can. And then you can always, the way I look at it, I can add another video to correct any errors or to update or to add new information. And so it's an ongoing thing, and everybody just keeps adding to the puzzle. It's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I can't imagine, well, I'm writing a book actually at the moment, but I can't imagine having it done and then 5 minutes later, or like the day after you've published it, you find out, oh no, actually that wasn't true. And you're like, oh God.
I know that happened to Mark Lewison.
I'm sure it does, but I think he's relaxed about it.
Yeah, I mean, you got to expect that because, God, the amount of information.
Yeah,
you got to
be relaxed about it and say, oh, you know, as you said, I've had people who actually managed to give me first-hand accounts. So,
well, let's go there, because one of the you've talked at great length about Albert Goldman and his book on John Lennon, The Lives of John Lennon, which across the board has pretty much been reviled by Beatle fans. And I had been revisiting that book and revisiting him a little bit. And it was based on something actually Mark Lewison had said, because Lewison had access to his notes and his research. Right. And Lewison said, you know what, this guy had really fantastic research, really good notes, good stuff. But what he did is he took the information and only gave one side, didn't give the other side. So does that mean we throw away the whole thing? I say no. So I want to look at that side. So you, in fact, kind of bumped into somebody who knew him. So why don't you give us a little background on that meeting?
Yeah, well, last year I did one of the original plans I'd had when I first started was to do some kind of Coleman or Goldman, Where is the Truth episode. And I finally did it in about episode 55 or 60 or something like that. And it's still by far the most downloaded Glass Onion podcast. I think it's got almost twice as many downloads as the next. Wow. Yeah. And that was with Ben Rowling, who's actually the cousin of J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter books, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And there was Caitlin as well. And she told me, oh yeah, I was in the Dakota. I used to play with Sean. They were the same age. So I put out that podcast, and then I said, oh, have you got any other memories? And she said, oh yeah, I'll send you them somewhere down the line. And in the end, we ended up just having a chat online. And then she said, oh yeah, we can do another talk. So she just talked more and more. And just, she didn't really have really concrete stuff because you were just a little kid, but there were just little things she said. And one of the things was that she did give an insight into John Lennon as a father.
Now, let me interrupt you for a moment because she is the daughter of. How does she fit into the Lennon household in the Dakota as a 5-year-old? Can you give that?
Yeah. Her mother was Marnie Hare, and Marnie Hare, I think they met John and Yoko on the street. Marnie Hare and her husband, and they got hired somehow. No, I'm going to forget it, but she kind of met John Yoko. Her and her husband met John Yoko on the street, and they ended up getting hired at the Dakota. But she was really a big confidant of Yoko's, and she befriended Albert Goldman, or she knew Albert Goldman already. And then when Goldman was bringing his book out, what's interesting is that Yoko recommended Marnie Hare to Goldman as a source.
Mm.
Said, "Oh yeah, my friend Marnie lives here. Yeah, she can tell you loads of interesting stuff." But then a lot of the stuff that she told Albert Goldman was some of the more controversial things. But that kind of suggests that Yoko wasn't too paranoid about her speaking to Albert Goldman.
Mm-hmm.
And also what was interesting that both Ben and Caitlin said, and then Caitlin had said, her mother had said the same thing, was that they all thought Yoko was lovely and they didn't have a single negative word to say about her.
Yeah, that's something we don't. I mean, I can't remember anybody who has used the word lovely to describe Yoko Ono, including John Lennon. Maybe he had, but that was kind of something new to hear. And when you get it from
The
an
young
employee or a 5-year-old girl, that's kind of heartwarming. Yoko's got a controversial character in the Beatles story, obviously. So it's nice to find out some of this stuff from somebody who dealt with her firsthand.
Well, one of the big things was that when Goldman's book came out, two of the sources, the big sources for the Dakota years, which I still think are the most interesting now because we still don't really know what the truth is, was Fred Seaman, who obviously was accused of stealing these diaries, which everybody seems to claim to have read. Yeah, so he was discredited apparently because of stealing the diaries, and then Marnie was discredited because what happened was Caitlin had broken her arm in one of Yoko's residences. I think it was the one in Palm Beach, Florida. And Marnie Hare had sued Yoko. So then that became, she was a kind of a spurned friend of Yoko who then dished all this dirt.
Okay.
But they were essentially dismissed for that. But actually, Caitlin said that Marnie had regretted suing Yoko about the broken arm.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been advised badly or something like that. This is all public, by the way, like on my podcast at least. So, so those were just some revelations. And she described Goldman, I'm going to use her words, as a bitchy queen who was extremely flamboyant but would bitch about people. Would say catty stuff about people.
Yes.
But she just didn't think that he would have in his mind to make all this stuff up about John Lennon and just create this book. I mean, I never read the Elvis book. I'd quite like to read that or read some of it.
Because
I found out.
Marnie Hare was quite friendly with Goldman as well. I would consider it sounded like they were actual friends.
I think they were, yeah. Because I think they were both very flamboyant people. And they were both quite good kind of raconteurs. So I think there was that. And, it was an absolutely bizarre household. I think it was a very eccentric household, whichever part of the story you believe. But there's just some really wild stories. But the thing that Caitlin remembered was that John would get very enthusiastic when he was playing with these 2 5, 6-year-olds, and then he'd kind of just drift away, which is kind of charming, I suppose. It doesn't make him a bad father. He probably gave Sean a lot of attention, I'm sure. But then she would say, she said the word, what people would say is, "Oh, Daddy's going to have a nap," and he disappeared. And we don't know if he disappeared for an hour, 3 weeks. That's the part we're not sure about. I
must confess to drifting away a couple of times on my boys. Now and then when I get them started, okay, I'm going to lay down and have a nap here. But that's interesting.
We're definitely all guilty of probably attaching more significance to things.
Yeah.
Another thing she said, I'll just say one more thing. This famous, was it 7 days silence he had?
Oh, I don't know that.
yeah, at some point, one of their residences, he decided he wasn't going to speak for 7 days. And Caitlin said she reckoned that was a parenting hack. Like, he wouldn't have to deal
with all the talking and yelling.
Yeah, he basically got left alone by adults and children for a week. So, but it's hard work, not speaking for a week. I mean,
well, that's interesting. Those couple of things where Lennon was retiring to his bedroom or wherever, he seemed to be. I mean, the information we have seems to be he indeed was reclusive, even within his own house. And Yoko was left to do a lot of the business stuff, which she did. And so that's interesting too. Some people don't know what to make of that because they fancy John Lennon as this great songwriter, but he was quite unprolific during that last 5 years, by and large, as a songwriter anyway.
I think he was being very productive. I mean, there's probably 50 or more songs, demos and stuff.
Okay.
I think he wasn't putting the final touches, and I don't think he had any intention of bringing them out. I think maybe he's just songwriting quite compulsively, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe.
And there's lots and lots of fragments from that time, but say that. But there's bits of evidence from here, bits of evidence from there. It'd be interesting to have a debate. We should do. I think a debate might come out quite 50-50, actually.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, the evidence. So the problem in some of this time period is we're getting information from people that are easily discredited. So if you don't like what they say, their testimony gets completely shit canned. And if you do like what they say, it gets completely accepted. But, like a Fred Seaman, I mean, there's his view of the things are merely his view. So I don't know how much of it would be true and not true, but it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, circling back, really, I mean, it's so difficult to know. So we just pick up these little bits, and it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard the Opperman Report. He's a podcast I listen to.
No, I haven't.
It's actually an investigative journalist, or investigative reporter who's called Opperman, who's got his podcast, and he kind of, the way he looks at it is like a forensic examination, like a little puzzle,
Okay.
But I don't know, what's your gut feeling about it? If you had to guess what John Lennon was like in the Dakota, what would be your gut feeling?
Well, I think there's, as far as the diaries that Seaman recalled and were written about by his friend years later, I think I'd go along with 50% of that. I think some of it may be slightly exaggerated. Some of it's probably downplayed. It can't all be correct, and it can't all be, I doubt that it's all wrong. But I do believe that a lot of that is probably accurate. And I do take it with a grain of salt because, Fred Seaman, not because he stole the diaries, and he does say that John Lennon wanted that out. I don't know what that means exactly and what John Lennon might have meant by that, because Lennon didn't know he was going to die then. Had he known, Lennon probably would have done a different thing with the diaries, because in the last year there, he'd started doing some audio diaries too, which have also gotten out. That we know, and we've heard that. A little bit odd. I mean, some of the audio stuff does give an insight into John Lennon's darker side or unsavory side, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just what it is. And the one thing I'm referring to is the information he talked about his mother when he was a boy, like a 14-year-old. And like almost a sexual thing could have happened if it was allowed. It was not allowed. But he mentioned that in 1980, which is a little odd to bring up. That's probably something I would have not brought up. But Lennon is Lennon.
I'm sure he didn't mean that diary to come out. I'm not sure where that came from. That must have been on the Lost Lennon tapes, was it? Or was
it may have been aired on there. I do know that I have a part of that audio where he did say that. So I don't know why you would do an audio diary with the hope that with the understanding that it would never come out. That's crazy. You would never utter that.
Yeah.
You're John Lennon,
Yeah, because he actually says, this is the life of the day of John Lennon or something like that. John Winston, Ono Lennon.
Yeah.
And then he literally does, I think, 20 minutes or something. Into this is
he got bored with his own life. He's like,
Yeah.
He really did. It was actually boring to hear, even though the salacious stuff about this thing with the mother, that's a little bit eye-opening, but even that was slightly boring because Lennon himself seemed a little bit bored with it, or a little tired, or just it seemed like he felt like he had to do this diary. He felt compelled to do it out of necessity, not because of a passion. I'm not quite sure exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe he started off thinking of it as a project.
Yeah.
I don't think he intended those 20 minutes to come out. But I think the thing with the mother, I think it was just, I don't know. I think it was more like he would consider doing anything, like drilling a hole in his head. You know that story.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
he was on an interesting track, that most of us, I think, are just not used to even conceiving of. He wanted to try everything. And that's, I think, when I learned that more in dealing with Joe Gooden's book, Riding So High, the Beatles drug use book.
yeah.
And he was really, and I got this also from some of your podcasts where you talked about Lennon exercising his demons. Can you
Mm.
maybe give me a little bit of your take on that, and with regard to the drug use?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's. I think those demons were just always there.
Mm.
And I think depending on the drug, I think some drugs were just useful for him, like preludine, and they were just to give energy. But he did talk about having these prelly chats with people. And he
Hmm.
wanted to go deep with people, and I think he's a weird mixture. I don't know if you've ever known people like this, a weird mixture of deep and shallow at the same time. So
Not many, not many.
right, right. You meet them occasionally though, like
Yeah.
they can have like a really shallow side to their personality,
Hmm.
maybe a sense of humor or something like that, but then have this emotional depth as well. And I
Yeah.
think he's probably sort of carrying those two things at the same time. So you've got what's happening right then in his life, like Hamburg or something like that.
Hmm.
But then there's a sort of depth of thinking which is going on at the same time. And I think I don't know if he ever would exercise his demons. In fact, I think it's more bringing them out to play, to be honest, to
Mm.
confront them. So something like LSD, I imagine sometimes he probably just laughed like a lot of people do. Maybe he just occasionally had trips where he just went out with John Dunbar or Keith Richards and
Hmm.
just had a laugh. And then other times he probably would him and someone else would look deep into each other's eyes. So
Yeah.
I think I think generally people take drugs for two purposes. One is to kind of have fun or relax, depending on the drug, and then the other one is to explore. So I think all that stuff was always there, just under the surface.
Hmm.
He's negotiating life with Beatle John, but then he's negotiating this very complicated kind of inner life.
Yeah.
You know?
It seemed to me that Lennon, when he had idle time, is
Mm,
when it seemed to get his drug use maybe went off the rails a little bit more. Because obviously in the Beatle years, it was just go, go, go. So
mm,
wherever he could fit the drugs in, it seemed to be he would fit them in, as opposed to when this touring stopped and he had a little more time on his hands. It seemed like to maybe get the better of him at sometimes, in terms of a production perspective. Work. He was not he was a lazier guy on drugs, I think, than he wasn't. So I
yeah.
don't know. But it's fascinating character.
Yeah, I think it's around 25, 26. I'm pretty sure he was already on the way to having some kind of nervous breakdown in the mid 60s. I think those kind of idle years in Weybridge, where we always hear he's living this domesticated life, but I still wouldn't say it's a normal life. It's like a bizarre,
Yes.
bizarre life of domesticity.
And when you say potential nervous breakdown during that time, what specific incidents or things are you referring to?
Well, probably things that we haven't heard about. In fact, I mean, I'm just speculating, really.
Yeah.
I'd say perhaps more a depression than nervous breakdown, because
Yeah.
I actually had a therapist on the show. I've actually had two therapists, but one of them was more willing to talk about John Lennon in terms of diagnosis. They're just
Hmm.
speculating. And he said one of the things was sleeping a lot. And we hear all these stories of, John Lennon would wake up and wouldn't know what time it was or what day it was. And so it's a mixture of a few factors, but I think perhaps not nervous breakdown, but perhaps a depression,
Yeah.
where he just, if he hasn't got any Beatles business to do and he's left to his own devices, he'll probably read a book, get stoned, watch TV.
Mhm.
I think that was his default setting for a while.
Yeah, that seems to be quite accurate from his whole life, really. But
Yeah.
yeah, voracious reader, which is a good thing, but the TV thing, I was trying just to pass the time, or I don't know. I think the sleeping thing does point to depression, and I don't know a lot about it, but yeah, there was something going on with that guy. Like I remember George Harrison said something in the anthology which surprised me a bit because that's such a sanitized telling of the history.
Yeah.
But I think he said near the end or at some point, we didn't realize how screwed up John was. This might have been in the book, not on the film.
Yeah, I don't think it was.
But when he said that, I think he meant it. I think they didn't realize because I mean, obviously, understanding depression is still not very much understood. It's only gotten better in the last probably 25, 30 years. And back then, I mean, it was just completely, probably not even a diagnosis. Would you even be diagnosed with depression then? It was maybe, manic depressive, I suppose, would be the thing in those days, which is a little bit different. But yeah, very interesting. Very interesting life he led, and to try to figure out some of the things that went wrong. If anybody has dealt with somebody with depression where there's a family involved, it doesn't always go smoothly. So that, I think that's worth exploring.
Yeah, I think it was. I think also they were living. I think what's perhaps one of the most incredible things about the Beatles story is how there seemed to be a point around 66, 67. They just seemed to all age about 10 years in terms of life experience.
Yeah.
And even, in the face to some extent. I mean, John Lennon, those pictures from the Sgt. Pepper party, he just looks, well, Goldman called him, he said he looked like a Victorian watchmaker.
Yeah.
Which is quite good because he had the little glasses, the very intense stare in his eyes. You look like someone who'd been concentrating on something for hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think they almost became old men at some point in terms of experience. So I think that maybe there's a kind of a fatigue that goes with that.
I think you're right. They crammed a lot of years in, those roughly 58 to 66. And as far as their look in 67, I always noticed that as well. They lost their baby fat.
Yeah, they were very
rather thin in 67 and, just more flamboyant clothing. It was just a different type of dress and everything. And yeah, I think they did the innocence was shed whether they wanted it to or not. And the Beatle family, I think when Daddy died, being Brian Epstein, went off the rails. As if you look at most households, if the father's not there, it doesn't always go so well.
Mm.
So I think that's how I like in that time frame. But it did take some time, and overall, I'm just kind of amazed that they held it together like they did, and they still were able to make great music.
Well, I think they're all just probably peaking as songwriters around the same time, arguably.
Which I would say, didn't last that long for any of them. I mean, a peak, anybody's peak creatively is a fleeting time.
Yeah.
And they had it probably longer than most. Lennon McCartney, obviously earlier than George Harrison, and then it had a way of sputtering out in the 70s and being a little spotty, but still flashes of brilliance here and there, but nothing like the 60s, obviously.
Well, the thing that we were talking about the other day, weren't we, was a point that's been brought up is the lack of experimentation, relatively speaking, in the 70s. And I wonder if in a funny way they'd almost done it all.
I think you said it exactly right. There comes a point, because there's a point in my life when I experimented less, because I just had done all that shit. I had those adventures. I didn't need to go into those adventures. And the new things, I can do different things as I was older, and they didn't seem as adventurous. They didn't.
Yeah.
In the Beatles' case, in music making, I mean, you don't make your hits don't come after age 35 typically. That's very unusual. After 40, forget it. But Sinatra had Something Stupid that was number one. I think he was 42, maybe. Very unusual. So yeah, I mean, the way the hit making days are in your youth, and some people don't really. They think that the music is as good even up till now, which I would disagree with. It's just a different kind of music.
Yeah, you have with all these artists, 60s ones, they tend to have sporadic moments where they come back, but maybe not quite sustained. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's not a nice thought if you're a songwriter to think that you might, if you hit 25, you may have peaked. And that's arguable, of course. But I mean, Dylan is a great one.
Yeah.
He comes back every now and again. But I still don't think anything tops. Probably Highway 61 and I guess Blood on the Tracks.
Blood on the Tracks is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
But he would have been about, let's see now, 1975. So he would have only been about 35, 34.
34. Yeah.
And that album is kind of like he seems to be looking back more, like Tangled Up in Blue. Obviously, that's a looking back song. A lot of the Beatles songs were looking back as well. But once Dylan had his Christian conversion, like in the late 70s, he came back and was never quite the same.
Well, there's one album, Time Out of Mind, I thought was really amazing.
Was it?
Yeah, I don't know.
Was that one? I don't know. I have not listened to that one. I've heard of it, but not listened to it.
Yeah, it's 97 with Daniel Lanois. He
okay.
2 good albums with Daniel Lanois.
And that's the same year as McCartney's Flaming Pie, his last real. So 97, yeah, kind of a interesting flourish there of activity by some of the old geezers that came up with being decent.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one that's had a sustained career, but people like I don't know, Neil Young or something like that. They probably as from the 80s onwards, I haven't really followed his career much, but I'm sure every now and again he comes out with great.
Yeah, guys like Neil Young, or I suppose your David Bowie's, or the guys who got very big, both critically and commercially, they could come back in and out over the years at will and still have a sizable following. So the album would sell. They could pack a pretty decent show. If you're a Beatle, well, then you can still sell out. But not a lot of people can say that. But it's they drip enough little tidbits to us in their older age to keep us coming back for more, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose the mark of success for an older performer is how many of your newer songs the fans respond to.
Yeah.
Do they use your newer songs to go off to the bathroom, or to take pictures of themselves?
Yeah.
While they're waiting for the Stones to do Brown Sugar or whatever.
Yeah, that's a classic example. What people want to still hear are the hits and the songs in their prime. So when I saw Steely Dan when they hit the road for the first time in decades, it was Walter Becker had a solo album out, and the poor guy played a couple songs from the solo album, and everybody just hit the bathroom in mass. And I've kind of felt sorry for the guy, but really that's it. But performers understand that. That's just, the good ones understand that. And that's just part of the game. You have your time, and then what's after your time, you have to deal with that in a very diplomatic, I guess, and dignified way. Some people don't deal with it in a dignified way. In other words, we're on the downside. So
I think what you need is, you need to have to not be saddled with one song that everybody has to hear.
Well, that helps.
And it's often not even the best song. I mean, I think of Thin Lizzy, they were around for a while.
Yeah, one time.
The Boys Are Back in Town is nowhere near their best song. I don't think Led Zeppelin's best song is Stairway, but I don't think that. But sometimes they latch onto it. But I think you're doing well if you're a performer, and you've got at least 10 songs to choose from as the essential song. If you've got one that everyone's waiting for, it must be a nightmare.
Being a fan of 60s music and seeing all these people come back from the 80s really to the present and see how they treat their back catalog, over the years, and as they grow into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, how they start to curate their own catalog and how they respond to fans. And some performers understand what the fans need more than others. And it's I've seen them done well and done poorly. So you've got certain fans that are diehards. You got to give them a couple obscure tidbits. That's really a bonus. You got to give them that instead of just hitting all the hits and then maybe bringing a cover song in or so. But it is nice if you do have multiple good songs in a long career. That's really quite a blessing to choose from. But I guess the ones that don't have that don't get on tour much. But
yeah, well, you can be Bob Dylan. You can just ignore what people want.
yeah, well, that's fascinating. With Dylan, I still have never seen Dylan, and I've been waved off of seeing him because for decades, it's like, God, he sucks live. You don't even know what songs he's doing. And he does that on purpose. Why do you, I mean, it's kind of like an FU to his fans in some ways, but it's also like, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
But his personality, this is one thing I've never liked about Dylan. He is purposely, from the very early days, always wanted to he doesn't want people to know who he is. And he'll be rude about it, and has been for 50, 60 years, to keep that anonymity or keep that to himself. I partly admire that, but his fan base is so big, he doesn't seem to give the fans, in person at least, what they might deserve. I don't like to use the word deserve, but
Yeah.
you get a better one?
I don't know. On some days, I feel like it's sort of almost like a begrudging admiration for that, because at least he's doing something different. That's the thing. If we can circle back to John Lennon, one of the fascinating things, if he had lived, was would he be a touring musician? And I don't know what you think about that, but I just can't imagine him.
Can't see it.
I can't imagine him just touring year on year, just doing those songs, unless he wrote loads of other great songs, unless he had an enormous back catalogue. But you feel like, he might have ended up doing a lot of those late 60s, early 70s songs. And I just can't see him having the patience, and I think he'd be too restless. So I don't know. I can't see John Lennon touring too much, but Dylan, I just have a kind of admiration. At least he's being true to himself, even if it's not the best side of his personality.
Yeah, well, Dylan, I mean, I remember seeing in my town, when Dylan come through, he played these absolute dives. That's where all the metal bands would go, all busted glass and shit. And he'd be in these dives. It'd be like $12 to get in to see Dylan. And so you may begrudgingly say he's doing what he's doing, but he's paying a price, and so are the people going to see him, that it's not in a nice place. It's in a shithole, and they may get, the sound isn't going to be good anyway, even if you could understand them. It's just a weird, Dylan's just weird, as opposed to McCartney, who's in the creamiest of nice places and tries to be something for everybody, which is also, I think, a fault of his. But yeah.
But do you think Dylan would Dylan have chosen those places though?
I don't know that he had a choice. In other words, the venues to him, he could have done real small, intimate places, which he still does. Nicer places that might have been, the 2,500 capacity, which is, I think, would be good for him and his music. But and he has done that. But yeah, I don't know. Again, he hasn't curated what he gives back to the fans live. It's not a curating of his catalog like a lot of other artists do, because people can't even understand some of the songs. They don't even know. It's a perfect example. The comedian Norm Macdonald? Well, he's a celebrity, and he's a big shot celebrity guy, comedian, was on Saturday Night Live. And so he's at a Dylan show, and Dylan and Ringo's in the audience, and they're in some of the close rows. And Dylan kept going, Ringo, Ringo. He sees Ringo in the audience. He kept saying Ringo's name. Ringo, what do you want to hear? Ringo goes, I don't know, Tangled Up in Blue. he said, Dylan goes, I played that already, you know. So it's
Right.
like, it was hilarious with Norm Macdonald telling it. But yeah, it's like, I don't understand why Dylan insists on being so contrary with his delivery. But
Yeah.
that's just how he is. They pay it because he's a legend.
Yeah.
They're not going to hear him, they're going to see him. In some cases, McCartney as well now.
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised about McCartney. You had mentioned earlier about all these different podcasts about the
Mm.
Beatles and how they popped up. And for every one podcast on John Lennon, of which yours seems to be the only one, there's like 10 Paul McCartney ones. And
Yeah.
one of the things as far as playing live and understanding your audience, one thing I think that McCartney has missed the boat on, passed up a wonderful opportunity, is to do a tour or two in the past 10 or 15 years. Maybe it's smaller venues, but it's just his solo stuff. He has got such a strong fan base that I think they would love for him to just focus on some of his best solo works and even some obscure stuff. And this is where McCartney, in my opinion, misses the boat and tries to be something for everybody.
Yeah, well, he played Glastonbury in about 2004 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember thinking, I think I was on my first ever Beatles forum, but every time I tried to pose a question like that, or do you think you should do like a stripped down set? Most people would just write back, "Oh, I don't care, I love him." You know, they were just looking forward to the show. But yeah, I remember thinking that he should do that. But you know, he went on the Glastonbury stage and did a similar show to the one he normally does.
Yeah.
But he's gradually he does add songs in, more obscure ones like "You Won't See Me" and stuff like that.
Yeah, he has added some obscure Beatle ones. That's true.
Beatles ones, yeah. But it would be nice. It would be nice to see him do a whole set of obscure stuff.
Yeah, it would be. Obviously, he's struggling. His voice is getting to the point where there's, in my opinion, some songs he shouldn't be doing. He's got a very good band that can hit some of the notes he can't hit.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've seen him, I think, 5 times maybe. The last 2 times I was extremely disappointed with his song selection and just his behavior, actually. But yeah, I mean, talk about having the greatest catalog to fall back on, really.
So what did you not like when you went to see him?
2 shows ago, I saw him at a big outdoor stadium in the heat, and I thought he was good, but the song selection I think was poor, and the way the order I thought was poor. It didn't blend well. But so I went. I said, I'll never go see him again. But then he came into my town again at a smaller outdoor venue, which was the smallest venue on the entire tour. I thought, this is more intimate. He's better in a more intimate setting. I find that he's much better indoors than outdoors. So anyway, I was excited to see him. Took my buddy, and he was just so intent on taking in every clap and all the adulation, where he was literally making muscles to the crowd, and it was just embarrassing.
Hey, listen, this is so cool. I'm going to take a second here just to drink it all in for myself, okay?
Tons of people there and love seeing him, and they're there to see him, and they did see him, so they could say, I saw a Beatle. But from my perspective, who had seen him 4 times before, I don't need somebody there just bowing repeatedly. I'd rather have him connect with the crowd and not just take from the crowd in that way.
I don't know. He must be in such a strange position. He's been famous for 55 years, and I don't know. I think all these people just they're live, they just exist. Even if they try and be normal, they just exist in this other stratosphere. I don't know. It's just,
Yeah,
who the hell knows what Bob Dylan or Paul McCartney's really like?
who knows? I mean,
Who
McCartney
knows?
on the surface, I mean, he seems to make himself available. He's always there's always something. He's always lurking around there in the background doing something. Carpool karaoke, or riding his bike or riding the metro or whatever. And he always seems to make it onto social media and the news doing that. So, but
Yeah.
if he had never done any music after 1999, I mean, I'm completely satisfied with what he's given us, and I don't expect anything from him, and that gives me a little bit different. I find it easier to critique his work because of that in his older age.
Right. Well, maybe they've done it all. Like I said earlier, they've done it all by 69. And
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to know. I mean, what do you do if I don't know if he believes that he's going to write another Yesterday, or if he wants to, or David Bowie when he was alive, is he going to produce another album like Ziggy Stardust? I don't know. Maybe that's just their life, isn't it? They churn them out.
Yeah.
And really, it comes down to how much effort they're making. And if you feel like Paul McCartney's phoning it in, or Dylan, or whoever, that's a valid criticism. You want to, I think as a fan, you just want to see them making an effort,
Well, and then what kind of, I mean, McCartney 3, that's an effort of a different kind. I mean, where, I mean, he had the time to himself to create this music, and that's not a bad idea. And people seem to like it. It was fairly well received, I think. I mean, there was some mixed reviews, but generally, I think it was good. But again, I mean, this is not stuff that I don't believe we'll be listening to 10, 25, 100 years from now. They're going to look at his back catalog up through the Beatles and the 70s. That's what people will focus on when he's mentioned. So, I mean, we won't be able to, the future generations won't be able to listen to everything, I have a lifetime. I'll never listen to everything that was created in the 60s, let alone the rest of the time, so.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that even when he brought out Egypt Station and McCartney 3, he's not really pushing those songs that much when he does shows, and that's kind of in his control. I think, why doesn't he do a show where he plays McCartney 3?
Now that I would have a lot more respect for, because then he would be, he would be working it. He'd be working the record. I mean, I guess he's kind of old school, but you're right. He doesn't, the tours that accompanied his recent tours, he doesn't play the new stuff much. It's all the old stuff. And, the new stuff is where the trinkets come in, the suitcases and the travel papers with it, and the splattered vinyl, all this. It's a treasure trove. It's a gift shop full of stuff, which seems to be where the focus is. It's not, he himself doesn't even seem to focus on the music that much once it's released.
Yeah, he didn't play that. Yeah, when Egypt Station came out, he didn't play that many. I guess he played Come On To Me and a couple of Who Cares and a couple of other ones. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see him be bold and if he does come back, when he's able to tour and everything. If he did a gig based around McCartney 3, we might see it in a different light. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the only way he could actually connect with an audience. I never felt, having seen him 5 times, I've seen him struggle to connect with an audience. And when you're in a stadium, I mean, it's not easy. And it's one thing if you're Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in 1970 connecting with the Rose Bowl crowd in Los Angeles on a sunny day. Those guys could do it. They could not do that now. I mean, that was in their prime. So again, people have their time, and sometimes just everything's working perfect when it's your time. You have to do different things when it's not your time, like all these different vinyl things and all these different toys that come with the packaging, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how much he has to do with that, but I really think, with a slightly different hat on, one of my other podcasts, that I think I don't know, it shouldn't really be encouraging that kind of thing. I think there should have been a backlash against that. But
Against the what specifically?
Just all these different versions of the stuff coming out.
Oh yeah, well, I had there was a backlash, at least from me,
Yeah, you had a backlash.
and the response. I mean, generally, I mean, I had a very high thumbs up rating for that video, but the thumbs down, which are always louder than the thumbs up, yeah, they some people just couldn't take the criticism of a marketing campaign, which is all I was talking about, and you know, quite frankly, the idea that Paul McCartney no longer makes music as much as he makes souvenirs. It was kind of the point I was making.
I think there's a market. I think the biggest market is always possibly non-hardcore fans when it comes to the Beatles. If he goes to play in I don't know, somewhere in South America, let's say Paraguay or somewhere, there's probably a few hardcore Beatles fans. I'm sure there are in every single country, pretty much.
Sure.
But it's a sort of populist idea. It's kind of like when the 8 Days a Week film came out. That was a populist film. That was made for casual Beatles fans. There's not going to be that much in it for us, you know. So I think his shows are just trying to their mass appeal shows.
Yeah, they are, and he still has a mass audience because he's a Beatle, and Ringo's All-Star Band is built on the same model, where it's for a mass audience, and he sits down, and the other guys. I've seen Ringo's All-Star Band at least 5 or 6 times, and in all these different configurations, and it was fun in the 90s. That was when they were still young enough, and they could do a little more. But now I don't, you know, I mean, how many times can you see that show? I mean, I've hit my limit about 10 or 12 years ago, I guess.
So Paul McCartney, the only time I've ever seen him was 89 or 88 or something like that. Somewhere.
Oh, wow.
I was so young. I wasn't even a Beatles fan particularly.
Ah.
I just remember it being good because I was growing up when he was bringing out No More Lonely Nights.
Oh, yeah.
Peace.
Sure.
So he was always the one, when I was growing up, I would have been maybe 8 or 9 when Pipes of Peace came out. Okay. He was always the guy who was always visible. He was always there. And I didn't hear of George Harrison for years. And obviously you learn at some point John Lennon's not around, obviously. He was always the more visible one. And he's got to remain that. And I think after Paul dies, which hopefully, you know, I hope is not going to be soon. I hope he lives a long, long life. But I think there'll finally be the time to breathe almost. We'll actually have time to properly reassess it.
That's a good point. Yeah, I've thought about doing a video because you've got some giant stuff. We got McCartney, you got Jagger, we got Dylan, got Brian Wilson, Paul Simon. Got some big guys that we're going to lose soon here. And I think that they're going to be venerated they're going to be handled very well. I think McCartney, once he does leave us, I think then he'll get the proper treatment that he probably has been trying to get with what some people call revisionist history. I think he's trying to like set some things straight. I think he's going to get that. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't always happen in our lifetime. But I don't think he needs to worry about that. And then there's going to be people that will sift through a lot of his stuff and decide, well, this is worthwhile, this is not, and whatever's not, that's okay, because we got all this. So I hope people will be able to receive bad criticism about some of his work, because that's okay. I've had work in my life that is worth criticism. We can't hit it out of the park every time up to the plate.
Yeah.
So it's just I hope people can kind of calm down a little bit, and you know, maybe John Lennon will die again, and then think people will calm down about John Lennon, because there's still like, it's still not, the dust has not settled.
Yeah, I'm contributing to that in a small way.
Well, I guess we all are, but I hope in our case, you know, we're trying to bring a little bit of reason to it. You know, I hope I'm not contributing to the pandemonium and the
confusion,
fanaticism.
No, I mean, it is a weird thing. Just going back to what I said earlier about drinking yourself sober, you know, of Beatles knowledge. You know, it's a weird thing. it just kind of goes in waves. Like I've been on other shows, and at a certain time I've been very enthusiastic about one thing, and then I'm kind of revising it. I think the revisionism is just going pretty much constantly, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm kind of I've drunk myself sober a bit too. In other words, I'm just not when those 50th anniversaries, Sergeant Pepper, White Albums, when those came out, I was excited about it, but when they came in the mail, I didn't feel that I had to open it right at that second. I'm just a little bit more because there's not going to be a lot of that, I think, coming to us anymore. The Let It Be stuff, I think, will be exciting.
Hmm.
I don't know that everything needs a 50th or 60th anniversary box set, but if anybody deserves it, I guess the Beatles should have it. They do look great on the shelf, but at some point, I'm going to get back to the music, which I don't listen to the Beatles a ton. When I do listen to music, there's a couple ways I do listen to them, but when I do listen to the Beatles, I do sit and really take them in. And I haven't done that in a while because this channel is keeping me. I've taken a different approach with them, which is very satisfying. But
so you're going more, I mean, do you think there's anything else of John Lennon for me to mine? Because I've got a few episodes I've already recorded, so the show's kept going. But do you think there's much more John Lennon to mine?
Well, I do. Yeah, I think it's a bottomless mine. The Beatles. Well, I mean, John Lennon. Where to go from here? I mean, a lot of was made over the 40th anniversary of his death, and I still think there might be some truths to come out. I do believe this diary business, if this does come out, which may well happen, there are 2 books on Yoko Ono pending. One that just got halted. That was a Peter Doggett book. That was about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And there's another book on Yoko Ono, I think, that may already be written by none other than Jeffrey Giuliano. These are all interesting things that when they do come out, it's going to create some chatter out there in the Beatle world. And I'm just hoping we all age enough and mature enough where we can do it in a tempered fashion,
Yeah, and if Sam's listening or watching, that was an entertaining interview.
Oh, Sam Wild.
The rest of it, let's listen to the rest of it.
Yes, I've watched some of Sam's videos on YouTube of his podcast. So that was an entertaining one. So Giuliano is another one of those characters that his contribution, he's written like over 20 Beatle books. And what some people do not want to accept, and this may be partly Giuliano's fault, is he's done a lot of interviews with actual Beatles and some very good insiders that other writers after him have used to write their books. So Giuliano, there may be some credit due him, but we'll see how that pans out because he's, again, I'm not like, I'd like to bring you on again. We'll maybe do our Coleman versus Goldman. Because I think I'm not a book burner. I'm not just because so-and-so says something bad about George Harrison's dog, all the work is bunk. So I do believe it does take work to dig through some of the bullshit to get to some of the stuff that actually has value. So Jeffrey Giuliano may be due for a going over of his work at some point because it's quite extensive.
Well, I really want to see Peter. I want to really read Peter Doggett's book. I want that to come out.
Doggett has been getting some hate lately, I've noticed.
I'd like to talk to him if he's watching.
I'd love to. Doggett, I think, is one of the great writers. I'm rereading his book, You Never Give Me Your Money. And I mean, he's got some very biting sarcasm, which I appreciate. I'm reading it again to just try to figure out why people are giving him some hate. They're calling it some bias. So I want to look into that a little bit. Maybe I need to ask Erin Torkelson Weber a little bit on that one as well. She's a giant in this whole historiography exercise on the Beatles. And I don't know why it got halted. I can guess, but I don't know. So anyway, that's just all recent things that have happened.
Yeah, Peter Doggett. There's a guy called Mike Tree, who I think was a security person. he was supposed to be writing a book, and that got the kibosh as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think
Really?
his name was Mike Tree.
So those are all interesting people that had firsthand experience. If that's gonna not allowed to be out,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I'm a little sad because again, Lennon and the Beatles, part of the price of their fame is this intrusion about people writing about them. Now, people could say, "Oh, just leave them alone. That's none of your business." Well, that is the price of fame, ladies and gentlemen. And some people are fascinated by uh, the Beatles and Lennon, so they're going to get interest, and it does sell. So that has to be reconciled not only by these estates that remain, but by the fans.
yeah. But it's just this sort of mystery idea of him in the last couple of years of his life, trying to fit the puzzles together. It's just endlessly fascinating. And can I just throw in something? This is kind of very speculative, but
Yes.
I listened to a podcast about Rosemary's Baby recently,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and it was a kind of a paranormal conspiracies, that kind of podcast. And they were talking about all these connections, and I went back and watched the film, and I think it really holds up. It's like an amazing film. And of course, it's very eerie because right at the beginning, you see them walking into the Dakota
Yes.
to see the flat, and then obviously you go past the spot where the heinous act happened. But there were a couple of there's a couple of weird bits. And you think, oh my god, all the witch, what is it? Satan worship, isn't it? That goes on in Rosemary's Baby. They live on the 7th floor, which is the same floor as John Yoko.
Wow.
And then quite early on in the film, you don't see it, but a woman resident who's been staying with this old couple who are Satan worshippers, she jumps out of the 7th floor window and kills herself.
Mm.
You don't see it, but it's outside the Dakota. You see this body, obviously covered in blood, and it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Dakota. And then, would you believe it, there's a VW Beetle parked on the street right in front. And not only that, but it's a white Beetle. So,
Wow.
and it looks exactly like the one on Abbey Road cover. And I'm not saying there's anything to it, but I think you're seeing. I like this mystery element. You know, I don't look for any answers, to be honest. But
Yeah. But I have heard, the Rosemary's Baby thing is kind of interesting. And yeah, there are some people can take it to a ridiculous extent, I suppose. But again, that's what makes these people are so fascinating. And the people feel compelled to continue to look and search and unearth stuff. Some things they unearth maybe aren't there, but some things are.
yeah, and it's funny. There's not actually that many people that I'm that interested in. Like I'd still say I'm quite iconoclastic. I don't think there's too many people. Like if I met, I don't know, Joe Biden in the street or something like that,
Yeah.
I'm not massively impressed by fame per se.
Yeah.
But there just seem to be certain figures, and perhaps it's because they're not around. I don't know. But he is still a source of endless fascination, John Lennon in his life.
Yeah.
But I think there probably is still stuff to be mined. I don't know.
Well, I say that it feels like it because if you look at Elvis Presley, who died only 3 years before John Lennon.
Yeah.
I mean, for decades, I haven't heard anything about Elvis other than going to Graceland or those kitschy things with regard to Elvis. The curation of his catalog, I don't hear much of that. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just not, I'm an Elvis fan, but I'm not a collector or anything. But I don't hear much about Elvis. I think there's not much more to be mined from that. I mean, that ended seemingly decades ago. And maybe Lennon's and the Beatles will too. And maybe at that point, those are going to start to fade a little bit more. But I think it has to do with maybe the baby boomer generation just grabbing onto the Beatles a little bit more here in America, at least. I don't know. Obviously, it was the baby boomers that also loved Elvis, and they seem to have maybe dropped him. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see.
Do you think there's still books out there to be written?
I think there are books to be written. I think right now, like Aaron Torkelson Weber's book, which is just an organization of some of the history that has been written on the Beatles, that blew my mind. That book, I think, I think there's a lot of organization that needs to be done. And then from there, maybe more books can be written. I consider myself maybe an organizer. I wouldn't be a writer. You might be a writer. I would consider myself more of an organizer. And a way to maybe create content that people can digest easily and quickly. That's my deal. And hopefully that's something people can use in the future and build on that.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Yeah, and try and fit the puzzle together. We're all trying in our ways, you know.
We're all trying to make sense of it all.
Trying to make some sense of it all. Yeah, that's not the Beatles. No.
Okay. Well, hey, on that note, that's a pretty good place to end. Again, I will leave your links below for people to check out your podcast. The Beatle-related podcast is called Glass Onion on John Lennon. And what were your other two again?
The other two, Film Gold, which is just about films I love, sort of slanting towards classics and quite a lot of 70s in there. And then Life and Life Only is, as one of my friends recently said on my show, it's kind of the John Lennon topics without John Lennon. So
okay, sure. we replace it for Marlon Brando.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. But a quick shout out, you just did a podcast with James Corbett on the Corbett Report. So there's a bit of cross-pollination going on here because he was on my Life and Life Only podcast. And he was one of the people I followed. And if you want lots of well-sourced alternative information, he's your guy. And he's a Beatles fan.
Yes, I will put the link to that Corbett podcast in as well. And one of my favorite podcasts you did was it was a review on that film Yesterday.
Oh God, yeah.
I loved it.
Oh yeah, you like that.
Yeah. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, watch that one. It's one of your shorter podcasts, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was nearly half an hour at the end, but yeah, it's funny when I sat down to watch that film about 6 months ago. I hadn't seen it up to that point, and some people said it was great, some people said it wasn't, and I was just expecting fairly formulaic, but with a few fresh ideas about plagiarism or something like that. And I just couldn't believe it. After 20 minutes, half an hour, they're just recycling Bridget Jones, Notting Hill. It's like they put it all in a blender.
Yeah.
4 Weddings and a Funeral, When Harry Met Sally, and they put it all together and get the script. But actually, I have to give the film credit because I was so possessed by this urge to kind of point out all this stuff and even make some serious points. That, I was quite pleased with that. So
yeah, you were rather it was very well stated.
I was there, yeah.
You were on fire.
It's kind of about the dumbing down of society as well, and it's about how I was really having a go at Richard Curtis, the writer, for laziness and lack of imagination as much.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's a good one. Yeah, you should. That's on YouTube, I think, my YouTube channel.
I'm going to link that one below.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Contrafib, which is an obscure reference to an episode of Blackadder, which was one of our best comedies ever.
Okay. Really? Okay.
Contrafib, yeah, and that's a mixture. I've got lots of music online, and then I have a website finally. It's Antony without an H, Rotunno.com.
Okay.
And I've managed to put everything together. So it's my podcast, my blog, my music. So it's all there in one place. Antony
is a musician. He's got several albums available to listen on his website as well. So I think you may find some good stuff there as well. But I'd like to do this again with you. I really enjoyed talking with you, and let's plan on doing another one in the near future.
Absolutely, yeah. And when we've done a couple, I'll take the audio and I'll put it into one massive podcast. It's far too long to digest.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's been great. Yeah, thanks for having me on.